Well, I'm excited to be joined by my friend Brent Dolfo here. Brent and I were colleagues at Leadership Network for the 13 years that I was there. Brent was already on staff. We had the opportunity to work on a lot of different initiatives, and we're collaborating on a new one through chemistry staffing around leadership development and a 7-week strategy lab for helping churches think through and develop leadership strategy. And so, Brent, tell folks a little bit about your background and the work that you've done in leadership development.
Thanks, Tim. Great to be with you again today. I have been involved with Leadership Network and was for close to 20 years. And one of the major topic areas I worked on is the area of leadership development, how to help large churches develop a great reproducing culture that allowed them to reproduce spiritual leaders across the whole of their church. And I've led sort of 10 cohorts of large churches all working on this subject together. So I've had a ringside seat into many of the most robust, effective models in America that have helped churches really develop this idea that I have more leaders than I need to accomplish the vision God's given me.
So as you and I have been talking about and preparing for this virtual strategy lab, if you were to pick out 2 or 3 things that you think are the most important things that church leaders need to be thinking about when it comes to becoming a great leadership development church, what would you say those things are?
Interesting enough, the number one thing that drives leadership development in churches is the idea that the church has embraced a big enough vision that they need to develop leaders, spiritual leaders. So I've discovered whether it's a multi-site church or a church planting church or a church that really wants to impact their community and sees all sorts of needs everywhere and not yet enough leaders to accomplish and meeting those needs, that vision drives leadership development. I think leadership development is always a means to an end, not an end in itself. And so that's the first thing, having a vision that's compelling, that's driving you forward. I see this in the life of Jesus. Jesus had way more opportunities to minister to the masses than he took. And he invested his time in a small group of people that would be the leaders of the church when he was resurrected. So his idea there of a vision for a worldwide church really drove him to spend time to multiply himself in the lives of people. And so again, a big vision is really kind of critical. The second thing that is probably important to think about is what I call embracing the end. Now, every staff member or leader that was voluntary in your church has an area of responsibility that they're doing. But great leadership development churches have embraced the and. Yes, I'm responsible for this part of the ministry, but I'm also responsible for multiplying myself and raising up people that could do what I do. And again, we see that as we've talked about in the life of Jesus. We see that in the ministry of Paul. Everywhere Paul went, he had 2 or 3 apprentice leaders he was taking with him to teach them how to do what he did and to develop them so that they could be leaders in the church. And so great leadership development churches have embraced this and concept. Lead what you have, but you also have a responsibility to raise up people that could lead and do what you do. And so that would be the second thing that I think is really important to make a great leadership development church. The third thing is culture. Now, we all know that culture in a church is created by what you reward and what you tolerate. And so great leadership development churches have championed this idea of the people that reproduce themselves and raise up leaders that are spiritually ready to lead, whether it's a new small group, help lead a new campus. Those people are the kind of the heroes around here because they're making heroes of other leaders. And so this idea that in our culture, do we have a culture that values more than excellence, more than diligence? Do we have a culture that really values and rewards and honors those that are amazing at developing other spiritual leaders? So those would be 3 quick things to think about.
Yeah, and we have taken those insights as well as some others that you've gleaned from your work with great leadership development churches and put them in a great PDF resource that we're making available to people. It has a staff discussion guide as well. And so it's a great launching point for teams that are really beginning to get serious about what it means to be a reproducing church, a church that develops leaders who develops leaders. And it's also kind of the launching point for this lab. We're working on a 7-week virtual strategy lab where we'll bring together teams that are trying to figure out, how do we develop a model for leadership development that's sustainable for our church? And there are 4 key things that we're going to be working throughout this 7 weeks. One being unpacking those things that make a great leadership development church. So what are those 10 truths, those 10 key insights, and what do they mean? What do they look like? Secondly is, how do you make that shift to a leadership development culture? You talked about how important culture is and what makes a great culture. And so to be a leadership development church, you've got to have a leadership development culture. And so that'll be the second thing we'll focus on. Third is that leadership pipeline. What is the structure that is in place, the processes that are in place to help develop leaders along the way? How do you think with the end in mind and plan for what you want people to become, and then create a pipeline that helps to move them and develop them in that direction? And then the last thing we'll focus on are staff development plans. How do you work with your team to continue to develop them and their careers as they're a part of that organization? So as you think about those things, Brent, anything additional you would add as we prepare for this lab?
Yeah, I think there's probably 3 words that come to mind as I think about this lab. The first is ideas. We want to bring you some really great ideas from some of the best churches in the world that are working on leadership development. But ideas are just the front edge of what we want to do here. The second thing is we want to actually help you implement those and actually help you figure out how I bring those to life in my own context. And the third thing that we want to really help you do is prepare those, to be an impactful ideas. And so we want what we're talking about to create a difference, make an impact in your culture, in your church, in your ministry. So think about this as not just simply ideas, but we're trying to bring ideas to implementation that would create great impact for you in what you lead.
Yeah, that's great, Brent. We look forward to working with some of you churches and church leaders in helping you think through, how do we develop a leadership development culture and pipeline for our church. To get additional information, we'll have in the post that goes along with this video a link where you can access that PDF and get a jump start on your thinking and conversations around leadership development. There'll also be a link to, once you download that, we'll send some additional information about leadership development, as well as a link to the landing page that will explain about the lab. And the best thing to do is to, on that page, schedule a call so I can visit with you and see if this lab would be a great fit for you. So we're excited about this opportunity and look forward to working with some of you in the area of leadership development.